just 5. And Vincent's face, the smug, self-satisfied face I had stared at across the breakfast table for 15 years, went completely white. His hands, those same hands that had once held mine while we planned our futures, started trembling. The papers he had been so eager to sign wavered like autumn leaves in a storm. And me. For the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need the context. You need the whole picture, because otherwise it just looks like petty revenge. And it's not. It's patience, strategy, and quiet justice. My name is Cassandra Hale. I'm 36 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was married to Vincent Mercer. 15 years. Longer than some Hollywood marriages last. Longer than some small countries have existed, and definitely longer than my patience should have lasted. But patience had become a skill, a survival mechanism, and I would need every ounce of it to navigate what was coming. I met Vincent when I was 19. I'd graduated high school early, not because I was some prodigy, but because I was practical, driven, and desperate to escape my parents' house before it crushed any remaining independence I had. I got a job at Henderson and Price law firm as a file clerk, minimum wage, maximum paper cuts, but mine. By 20, I had worked my way up to legal assistant. I was meticulous, quiet, and observant. I could balance ledgers, organize schedules, and keep my opinions to myself while noticing everything happening around me. Skills that would serve me far better than I knew at the time. Vincent was 26 when I met him at a client event. Charismatic, ambitious, full of dreams about building a real estate empire. He spoke of the future like it already belonged to him, like success was simply waiting for him to arrive and claim it. He asked me to help with paperwork. Romance, right? By 20, I was married to him. Tyler came along when I was 21, and I continued working part-time while raising him. I saved every spare dollar, contributed to my 401k, and tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. My grandmother, who had passed down a sharp intellect and an iron sense of practicality, always said a woman should have her own money. Not secret money, just her own. Something no one could touch, no one could claim. I clung to that advice as the years went on. Vincent's business started taking off when I was 24. He asked me to quit the law firm and work for him full-time. He said he needed someone he could trust completely. Someone to manage the books, handle clients, coordinate contractors, oversee marketing, plan events, decorate model homes. I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client liaison, interior decorator, accountant, project manager. My official title was wife. My unofficial title was everything else. 11 years I poured myself into building his empire, watching him take credit for everything, receive the awards. The accolades, the recognition. And at industry events, I stood by as his supportive wife, smiling, nodding, remaining invisible. Somewhere along the line, he stopped consulting me. He started criticizing the small things, my clothing, my meals, my ambitions. I was doing his entire back office for free, raising his son, keeping our household together, yet it was never enough. Then, 3 months ago, it all came crashing down. It was a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner, his favorite actually, probably because I was still somehow desperate for his approval after 15 years. He sat me down at the kitchen table, all business. "I want a divorce," he said. Then, with the precision of a man ordering from a menu, "I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Tyler." The way he said it, as if he were offering me leftovers, was staggering. 15 years, reduced to a choice between survival and losing everything I had helped him build. The next day, his mother arrived. Lorraine Mercer, the woman who had spent 15 years treating me as an intruder, a clerk in my own home. She patted my hand and suggested I should have tried harder. "Men have needs, dear," she said, as if explaining something complicated to a child. The hypocrisy was staggering. Her husband spent 7 days a week on the golf course, away from her, yet somehow it was my fault that Vincent wanted to leave. I was blindsided. Everything was moving too fast. Documents, settlements, deadlines. A week later, my closet had shrunk. My bedroom had become the guest room. I was packing my life into garbage bags while being told what was and wasn't mine. Lorraine decided which family photos I could take, which recipes I could keep. Jewelry, furniture. Marital property, according to her. Marital property? I had spent years buying, choosing, managing these things, and suddenly they weren't mine. And then there was Brittany Sawyer. Of course, she existed. 27, perfectly polished, Instagram-ready, walking into my kitchen like she belonged there, like my apron and blender were just props in her new life with my husband. Vincent paraded her like a trophy. It was humiliating. The audacity of someone younger than my marriage, younger than the handbag I had splurged on for my 10th anniversary, moving in and making herself comfortable in the life I'd built. Simply unbearable. Through it all, I had one ally, or so I thought. Diane Holloway, my best friend since high school. She was supportive at first, wine, tissues, sympathetic smiles. But then subtle inconsistencies started appearing. Vincent seemed to know what I was planning before I even said it. When I mentioned apartments in a specific neighborhood, Vincent dismissed that exact area. When I talked about protecting the house, Tyler heard his father saying I was making it difficult. Something didn't add up. Eventually, I realized Diane wasn't a friend. She had been working for Vincent, willingly or not, for years. The worst part? Tyler saw everything. The shifting dynamics, the new girlfriend, the controlling grandmother, the dismissive father. His confusion and distance cut deeper than any financial loss, any betrayal. I needed a plan. I needed to protect him and myself. I hired Nina Castellano, a lawyer recommended by my former firm. Sharp, precise, ruthless. She assessed the situation and immediately recognized the leverage I had. "You helped build this business," she said. "You are entitled to half of everything, the house, the company, the accounts. We fight." I didn't want to fight, not yet. I needed patience. 3 years earlier, I had found it, the truth about Vincent Mercer's financial empire. Late one night, I stayed up until 3 a.m., tracing transactions. Mortgages, loans, lines of credit maxed out. The house, supposedly ours, had 3 mortgages, leaving us $250,000 underwater. The business, hundreds of thousands in debt. The cars, leased, not owned. Expenses funneled into luxury, gambling, cryptocurrency losses. The empire was an illusion, and I had the evidence. I had also protected myself. My grandmother's inheritance, my IRA, nearly $520,000, untouchable, secured in a trust for Tyler. Vincent didn't know, and he would never suspect it. For 3 years, I quietly watched, waited, and prepared. When he finally demanded everything in the divorce, asking for the house, the cars, the business, I was ready. He didn't understand he was demanding debt, all of it. My settlement would be small, unremarkable, perfect camouflage. He would think he had won, and then the hearing would come, the moment of truth. The revelation: I've always been patient, I've always known my own worth. And after 15 years, 3 months of humiliation, and 3 years of meticulous planning, I was about to show Vincent exactly who had been in control all along. It started on a random Tuesday night, 3 years before Vincent finally asked for a divorce. I was alone in our home office, the same office where I had spent countless late nights balancing spreadsheets, reviewing contracts, and keeping track of the tiny details that made his empire look polished from the outside. He was working late, as usual, a phrase that had become the soundtrack of our life together. I was going through the company books, reconciling accounts like I always did, and something felt off. A transfer to an account I didn't recognize, then another, then a series of transactions that didn't add up. I paused, frowned, and printed everything I could find. I was meticulous. I wanted a paper trail. By 3:00 a.m., my kitchen table was covered in printouts. There were bank statements, invoices, credit card summaries, loan documents, and even receipts I didn't recognize. I traced each number, each wire transfer, each withdrawal. The picture that emerged made my blood run cold. Vincent's thriving empire was a house of cards. The house, our house, the one everyone admired, was far from fully owned. 3 mortgages. The first, $400,000, taken out years ago when we bought it. The second, $350,000, taken 4 years ago. The third, another $350,000, taken just 2 years ago. Total owed, $1.1 million. Actual value of the house, $850,000. We were underwater by $250,000. The business was worse. Lines of credit maxed out at $200,000. Vendor debts of $120,000. Equipment loans at $75,000. Back taxes owed, $85,000. The numbers were staggering, and each one pointed to the same terrifying truth. Vincent had been living beyond his means for years. He hadn't been building an empire. He'd been pretending to, meticulously covering his tracks, while I had worked tirelessly to make everything appear flawless. The cars were leased, all three of them, with balloon payments looming like ticking time bombs. The lavish lifestyle, the trips, the watches, the suits, it was all funded by debt or mismanaged money. Cryptocurrency investments, $180,000 all lost. Gambling, another $75,000 gone. And then there was an apartment I didn't know about, rented for someone he was hiding, complete with furnishings and rent paid out of our accounts. $60,000. By the time I finished tallying the numbers, I realized the total debt exceeded $1.9 million, while the total asset value barely reached $1.6 million. We were $300,000 in the hole. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. 15 years of marriage, 11 years of unpaid work keeping his business afloat, and it all came down to this. He was bankrupt, and he didn't even know it yet. That night, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. If he knew I had discovered the truth, he would have found a way to manipulate me, to blame me, or to try to access my own separate funds. I had always kept a portion of my own money, just like my grandmother had advised. My IRA from my law firm years, untouched, had grown to $180,000. And my grandmother's inheritance, carefully preserved, added another $340,000. Together, $520,000 in legally protected, separate assets, money that no one could touch. I contacted my uncle, a retired accountant with a sharp eye for details. We created an irrevocable trust for Tyler. My funds went into that trust. My name wasn't on it as a beneficiary, and certainly not Vincent's. It was untouchable, reserved for Tyler's future, college, emergencies, a first home. I documented everything, printing copies, storing them off-site at my sister's house, and saving encrypted digital versions. I became a silent observer of the collapse I knew was coming. For 3 years, I watched. I smiled at dinner parties. I congratulated Vincent on supposed business successes. I pretended ignorance while his empire of illusions crumbled beneath him. I became a master of patience, a professional at invisibility, hiding my knowledge behind the face of a defeated, exhausted wife. Meanwhile, Vincent continued to believe he was winning. He spent money on luxury watches, extravagant dinners, and furniture upgrades, everything at my expense, emotionally and financially, through our combined accounts. He stopped checking the books, confident in his own delusions. That was the mistake that would ultimately destroy him. The moment of truth came when he demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything except Tyler. He thought he had victory in his hands. He had no idea the empire he thought he owned was nothing more than a mountain of debt he would now legally assume. But I had to play the role. I had to be convincing. When I hired Nina Castellano, she told me one thing repeatedly. We fight when it counts. We appear weak when we must. Let him think he's won. Let him be overconfident. That's when he'll make the mistakes that will protect you. I followed that advice to the letter. I moved into a tiny apartment with Tyler, packing what little I could claim into 2 rooms and a single bathroom. My furniture was second-hand, my kitchen small. The boxes sat stacked in the corner like a monument to the life I had lost, or rather, the life I was letting him believe I had lost. Every day, I watched Vincent's arrogance grow. Brittany moved in, rearranging my home as though she had always belonged there. She painted the walls gray after I had spent 3 weeks selecting a sage green that I loved. She laughed while using my kitchen, posting photos on social media, flaunting her intrusion. Meanwhile, Tyler observed. My son was perceptive, more perceptive than Vincent realized. He noticed the contradictions. A $15,000 watch on his father's wrist while being told the school trip to Washington, D.C. was unaffordable. Shopping bags piling up in the foyer while Vincent claimed the business had no cash flow. Tyler began asking quiet questions, watching both of us carefully. I gave him only enough guidance to assure him that things were under control. The rest, I let him observe. Behind the scenes, Nina Castellano was preparing our legal strategy with surgical precision. She reviewed every mortgage, every hidden account, every loan. She outlined the liability disclosure statement, a single document that would turn Vincent's victory into a personal financial catastrophe. Every debt, every mortgage, every lease obligation would transfer entirely to him. He would have requested it himself, signed it willingly, and had witnesses to confirm. And Vincent, in his arrogance, never read the fine print. 3 years of preparation, careful planning, and quiet observation were about to culminate in a courtroom revelation that would leave him reeling. I had built the trap piece by piece, patient, silent, and unassumingly perfect. That night, as I stacked the final printouts in my safe, Tyler asked me a simple question. "Mom, is Dad actually rich?" I paused, looking at him across the kitchen table. His eyes mirrored his father's in shape and color, but carried a depth Vincent had never cultivated. Honesty, intuition, intelligence. "What do you think?" I asked. Tyler sat quietly, processing. "I don't think so," he said finally. "Something doesn't add up." "Exactly," I said, squeezing his hand. "Just wait a little longer. Everything will be fine." That night, I felt a small sense of satisfaction, not because I had won anything yet, but because my son understood, because he saw the truth. Because the years of observation and careful patience had created clarity in the one person who mattered most. And the next morning, I called Nina. She went over the entire plan again. The 3 binders of documents, the mortgages, the business accounts, the hidden debts, the IRA, the inheritance, and the irrevocable trust. Every number verified, every transfer accounted for. We were ready, I was ready. Vincent believed he was about to receive everything he had ever wanted. A house, cars, a thriving business, freedom. A new life. What he didn't know was that every step had been orchestrated to protect Tyler and ensure that his arrogance and ignorance would become his undoing. I reviewed the documents one more time, flipping through the detailed account of his finances. The liabilities alone would be staggering. Mortgages of $1.1 million, business debts totaling $480,000, lease obligations for vehicles at $115,000, and personal liabilities of approximately $200,000. Total negative equity, roughly $300,000. All of it would legally be his once he signed the settlement agreement. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the numbers, at the carefully documented evidence, at the binders filled with 3 years of careful preparation. A quiet smile spread across my face. Vincent had spent 15 years underestimating me. 3 months ago, he thought he had finally won. In a few days, he would learn the cost of his arrogance. I poured a cup of tea, watching Tyler eat his breakfast at the table. My small apartment, my second-hand furniture, the boxes in the corner, all of it was mine now, truly mine. For the first time in years, I felt free, and I was ready to watch the empire of lies collapse. The morning I signed with Nina Castellano, I felt a strange combination of nerves and relief. There's a difference between knowing something and having the power to act on it. For 11 years, I had been Vincent's unpaid partner, his accountant, his confidant. Now, for the first time, I was his equal in a battle he didn't even know was coming. I moved into my small apartment that afternoon, dragging a few boxes and the essentials. Tyler followed, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide at the sheer scale of the downgrade from our old house. My new home was modest. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit the microwave and stove, and a living room with mismatched furniture donated by friends. The first night, I set up the binders I'd compiled over 3 years. Every bank statement, mortgage document, account transfer, loan agreement, and invoice meticulously organized. My hands hovered over them as I traced the numbers one last time. The weight of preparation was heavy, but it wasn't anxiety. It was anticipation, the kind that comes from knowing you are steps ahead. Vincent, on the other hand, had no clue. His calls to Tyler were filled with instructions and reminders. Make sure you do your homework. Tell your mom we're moving forward. I could hear the subtle arrogance behind his voice, the kind of confidence only someone who believed they were in control could carry. I didn't respond. I let him think he was still winning. The first meeting with Nina felt almost ceremonial. We sat across from each other, papers spread across her small office. This is going to be simple, she said, her voice low, deadly calm. We let him think he's getting everything. He signs, he assumes the liabilities. We walk away. Clean, Tyler's future secured. Your IRA and inheritance untouched. I nodded, absorbing every word. Nina's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Appear weak, ask for nothing, and let the overconfidence of a man who thinks he's invincible destroy him. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. Never let anyone see you sweat, Cassandra. Keep your own money, protect your son. For 3 days, I played the role perfectly. I cried when Tyler asked why we had to move. I sighed loudly when I carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs. I asked Vincent's friends for advice as if I were naive, hesitant, unsure. Every comment I made, every expression I wore was calculated to make him relax, to make him believe he had won. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Nina was relentless. She reviewed every transaction again, double-checked every mortgage, and even spoke to a forensic accountant she trusted to confirm the numbers. She prepared the liability disclosure addendum, a single document that would make Vincent legally responsible for every debt associated with the assets he so eagerly claimed. It was airtight, and he would have signed it himself, thinking it was just part of a routine divorce settlement. I remember the day I saw him for the first mediation. He walked in with that same arrogant smile, perfectly tailored suit, new watch catching the sunlight through the courtroom windows. He looked like a man who had already won. His confidence was tangible. It filled the room like a heavy perfume. I swallowed the urge to roll my eyes and played my part. I looked tired, fragile, worn down by the stress of the divorce. My navy dress hung loosely, my hair in a simple bun, no jewelry. I moved slowly, hands slightly trembling as if the world was collapsing around me. Vincent's eyes softened, just a fraction. He thought he had broken me. Perfect. The mediator started with standard questions. Mrs. Hale, do you understand the terms you are agreeing to? You're relinquishing all claims to the family home, business, and vehicles. Are you certain? I nodded slowly, voice soft, unsteady. Yes, I understand. I want this to be over. Vincent beamed. See, he said to Harold, his lawyer, she's reasonable. She's giving up everything without a fight. I bit back a smile. She was giving up everything. Sure, but she didn't know she'd just handed him a mountain of debt. Over the next few sessions, Vincent became increasingly relaxed. He let his guard down. He bragged about the new house he would move into, the office he would expand, the vacations he would finally take without me holding him back. He was so convinced of his victory that he didn't notice the subtle cues we planted. Nina's careful phrasing, the slight emphasis on liability in casual conversation. The paperwork he didn't read in full. Meanwhile, I kept Tyler close. He noticed the contradictions. A $15,000 watch on Vincent's wrist while he grumbled about paying a vendor. Shopping bags piling up in the foyer while the business supposedly had no cash. He began asking questions quietly, thoughtfully. I answered just enough to guide him without revealing the full plan. His observation skills were remarkable, almost like he had inherited my ability to see what others overlooked. Back at the apartment, I started planning my life after the divorce. Interior design classes at the community college, small projects to build a portfolio. Every day, I reminded myself that I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing to thrive. I painted the walls sage green, a color that reminded me of hope. The small space, the second-hand furniture, the stacks of boxes, it was mine now, and everything in it represented the life I was reclaiming. 3 weeks before the final hearing, I received a text from Vincent. Thank you for not making this ugly. I stared at the message, letting it sit. 15 years of marriage, 11 years of hard work building his empire, and this was his gratitude. I typed back, I just want what's best for Tyler. Behind that simple message lay the culmination of 3 years of careful preparation, patient observation, and quiet revenge. The trap was set. The paperwork, the trust, the separate funds, all of it ready. Vincent would demand everything, and he would get it. Every asset he claimed, every house, every car, every dollar of the business, along with the full weight of the liabilities he had blindly signed for himself. I remember sitting at the small kitchen table, Tyler across from me, the binders stacked neatly in a corner. "Mom, is this really going to work?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, my heart swelling with both pride and love. "It's going to work, Tyler. Trust me, just wait." He nodded, the kind of nod that comes from understanding more than most adults ever do. Meanwhile, Vincent continued his parade. Dinner dates with Brittany, weekend getaways, photos on social media, bragging about how easy the settlement had been. Every post, every boast, every careless signature on the forms pushed him closer to his own undoing. He didn't see it, but I did. I had watched him for years, knew his habits, his impatience, his ego. All I had to do was let him believe he was untouchable. And then came the final week before the hearing. Vincent called repeatedly, asking Harold questions about the paperwork, the numbers, the assets. Harold, with decades of experience, tried to warn him, tried to suggest an independent audit, but Vincent waved it off. Brittany wanted this done. He wanted it done. No delays. He signed the waiver without reading it, acknowledging in writing that he declined an independent financial review. Every signature, every checkbox, every witness was in place. The trap was complete. I watched him through the peephole one evening, pacing in the hallway outside my apartment. He looked frazzled, unaware that the trap had been waiting for him for years. He was about to learn the cost of arrogance, impatience, and blind overconfidence. And I was ready. 3 years of preparation, observation, and patience had led to this moment. Everything I had done, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every careful step, was about to pay off. Cassandra Hale, they would remember the name. Because while Vincent Mercer had thought he was winning, he had no idea the storm that had been quietly building around him for the past 3 years. And when the courtroom doors opened on that Thursday morning, he would finally understand. The morning of the final mediation, I woke earlier than usual. There was no anxiety, only the electric hum of anticipation that comes from knowing you are in complete control, even if no one else sees it yet. Tyler had gone to school, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes still sleepy but observant as ever. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, and ran my fingers over the binders I had prepared for Nina. 3 years of planning, 3 years of careful patience, 3 years of knowing exactly how this would end. When we arrived at the mediation center, Vincent was already there. Of course he was early. Confidence radiated off him in waves. His watch sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the lobby windows, and he carried himself like a man who had just won the lottery. Brittany hovered at his side, eager to witness the triumph she thought was inevitable. Harold Whitfield looked uneasy, as though he had sensed the storm but didn't yet understand the scale. I took a deep breath, smoothing my navy dress and adjusting my hair into a simple bun. No jewelry, no flourishes, no hint of the power I carried beneath the surface. My heart beat steadily, not with fear but with satisfaction. Cassandra Hale, the woman everyone had underestimated, was about to walk into a room filled with men who thought they were untouchable and leave them gasping for air. Nina Castellano and I were the first to arrive in the mediation room. She spread the binders on the table, placing the liability disclosure statement in the center, almost as if she were presenting a rare and dangerous artifact. I watched her carefully. She had the calm precision of a surgeon. Every piece of paper, every line of text, every total and subtotal had been double-checked, triple-checked, and verified. Vincent entered with a flourish, shaking hands with the mediator, and offering a patronizing smile toward me. "Good morning, Cassandra," he said, as if he were greeting someone who owed him their existence. "Ready to make this easy?" I nodded, voice soft, almost hesitant. "Yes, Vincent. I just want this to be over." Perfect. The mediator began the session with standard protocol. "Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Hale, you've both agreed to preliminary terms." Let's review the agreement and ensure all parties understand the liabilities and responsibilities involved. Harold leaned toward Vincent and whispered, "Sir, make sure you review these carefully. There are some unusual clauses." Vincent waved him off with an air of casual arrogance. "I know what I'm doing. Let's get this done." He did not read the fine print. He never read the fine print. I took my place at the table, hands resting lightly on the binder. I glanced at Nina, who gave a subtle nod. The mediator began reading through the settlement terms. House, vehicles, business interests. Vincent's mouth curved into a smile with every item. He was so certain of his victory that he didn't even glance at me. "Mrs. Hale," the mediator said, "you are relinquishing claims to all marital assets. Do you understand?" "Yes, I do," I replied softly, voice trembling just enough to maintain the illusion. "I want him to have everything he asked for." Vincent leaned back in his chair, smiling as he whispered something to Brittany, who giggled and twirled a lock of her perfectly highlighted hair. I bit back a smile. The illusion was working perfectly. Nina began placing the addendum, the liability disclosure statement, before Vincent. "This outlines the obligations associated with each asset you're claiming, Mr. Mercer," she said, calm and deliberate. "It includes mortgages, business loans, car leases, and other debts tied to these assets. By signing, you acknowledge you understand and accept responsibility for these liabilities." Vincent's eyes flicked briefly at the pages. He shrugged. "Fine," he said, brushing past the details as though they were meaningless. "Sign me up." Harold leaned in, whispering urgently, "Sir, these numbers—" "Not now," Vincent said sharply. "I'm not delaying this any longer. Brittany wants it done. I want it done. Sign it." And so he did. Signature after signature, checkbox after checkbox, all in blind confidence. He didn't read, he didn't verify, he didn't pause to consider the implications. He wanted the assets. He believed he was getting the empire he'd been bragging about for years. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, maintaining the fragile mask of defeat. I spoke softly when addressed, avoided eye contact, and allowed the room to believe I was broken, exhausted, and compliant. The only thing I felt was the quiet satisfaction of watching the wheels turn, beneath a man who had spent 15 years believing he was untouchable. Harold glanced at the documents again, unease evident in his posture. "Sir," he whispered one last time, "we should conduct an audit before finalizing." "I strongly advise it." Vincent waved him off, impatience clear. "I've built this business. I know what it's worth. No audits." It was exactly the response I had anticipated. He was rushing toward the precipice of his own making. Once the final signatures were in place, the mediator confirmed, "All parties have signed voluntarily. This agreement is binding." Vincent leaned back in his chair, satisfied, triumphant. "See, that wasn't so hard," he said, flashing his winning smile at Brittany. "We're done." And then Nina Castellano spoke, calm but sharp, her voice cutting through the smug atmosphere like a scalpel. "Mr. Mercer, I just want to confirm. You are aware that by signing this addendum, you have accepted full responsibility for all liabilities associated with the assets you have claimed. Mortgages, business loans, car leases, and additional debts are now legally yours. There is no shared responsibility with Mrs. Hale. Do you understand?" Vincent blinked. A flash of uncertainty crossed his face. Yes, of course I understand." The mediator raised an eyebrow. "Are you certain, Mr. Mercer?" "This includes every mortgage, loan, and obligation tied to the assets in your name. There is no legal recourse for transferring these liabilities back." Vincent's smile faltered, just a little. Yes, I understand," he stammered, trying to regain composure. I maintained my mask, hands resting lightly on the binder, eyes downcast. Tyler, who had been observing quietly from the back of the room, caught my glance. His expression was calm, thoughtful, but there was pride in his eyes. He understood, even at 15, the significance of what had just occurred. The mediator signed off, and the session concluded. Vincent stood abruptly, collecting the documents. He looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, you knew," he whispered, barely audible. I met his gaze calmly. "I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Vincent." I knew exactly how everything worked. The color drained from his face. The smug confidence that had carried him through 15 years of manipulation vanished in an instant. He scanned the documents again, desperation creeping into his movements. This isn't right. You tricked me. You manipulated everything. Nina Castellano's voice was quiet, precise. Mr. Mercer, every document is accurate. Every liability is yours. You signed voluntarily, with counsel present. You declined an independent review. You assumed the risk. Vincent turned to Harold, voice rising. Didn't you see this? Didn't you warn me? Harold's expression was calm, almost pitying. I did, sir. You declined my advice. You signed the waiver. For the first time in 15 years, Vincent looked like a man unmoored, vulnerable, panicked. The empire he thought he had built, his wealth, his power, his bragging rights, had turned into a burden he could not bear. Brittany, standing just outside the courtroom, caught a glimpse of his expression through the glass door. Her perfect composure faltered, confusion and fear replacing the confident smile she had worn for weeks. Tyler, still quiet in the back, leaned closer to me. Wow, he whispered. He really didn't see it coming. I squeezed his hand. No, that's why patience matters. 3 years, Tyler. That's how long I waited to make sure you and I would be safe. Outside the mediation room, Vincent's calls became frantic. He demanded explanations from Harold, trying to find a way out, some loophole, some magic solution. But the law was clear, the documents airtight. Every mortgage, every loan, every obligation was now his responsibility. The man who had spent 15 years building a life on borrowed money, deception, and ego was finally facing the consequences of his own choices. That afternoon, I returned to my small apartment with Tyler. I placed the binders back on the shelf, smooth and orderly, ready for the eventuality that anyone might try to question our actions. I opened the window and let the spring air fill the room. Sage green walls, second-hand furniture, a few carefully curated personal items. It wasn't the house I had shared with Vincent, but it was ours. My son's life was secure, our future protected. Vincent, meanwhile, had inherited a nightmare. Mortgages overdue, business creditors calling, leased cars with balloon payments looming. Every boast, every Instagram post, every arrogant statement he had made now weighed on him like chains. The empire he had imagined was dissolving before his eyes. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe. I had lost nothing. I had protected Tyler. I had secured my inheritance, my IRA, my future. I had done what I needed to do. Cassandra Hale was finally free. And Vincent Mercer had learned a lesson about arrogance, impatience, and underestimating the woman he had once called his wife. The afternoon sun poured through the apartment windows, casting a warm glow over the sage green walls. I sank into the second-hand armchair, Tyler stretched out on the couch beside me, headphones on, scrolling through his phone. It was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full of potential, full of relief, full of a life we had finally earned. It was almost surreal, the contrast between the courtroom chaos and the calm of this small space we now called home. Vincent's empire, his confidence, his swagger, all of it had crumbled in less than a week. Mortgages he didn't understand were overdue, business lines of credit frozen, vendors calling with threats of legal action, car leases ballooning into impossible payments. Everything he had demanded was now his problem, and I had asked for nothing but safety and stability for Tyler. I sipped my coffee and let myself exhale for the first time in years. 3 years of patience, planning, and observation had led to this moment. 3 years of quietly knowing the truth, documenting every transaction, every suspicious transfer, every debt and obligation. It had taken time, but the payoff had been perfect. Tyler looked up from his phone. Mom, I can't believe how fast everything fell apart for him. I smiled softly. Sometimes, what goes up too fast falls even faster. He built his house of cards on sand, Tyler, and he never realized it until it was too late. He frowned, thoughtful. I still feel a little bad for him, though. I mean, he's your dad. I reached over and ruffled his hair. He's still your dad, Tyler. That hasn't changed, but he made choices that hurt us, and he'll have to live with them. He nodded slowly. I could see the gears turning in his mind. the way he processed situations with precision far beyond his years. He had watched everything. The lies, the pretense, the games Vincent played with me, with Diane, with Lorraine, and he had seen me act. He had seen me smile through humiliation, stay quiet while being underestimated, and make choices that protected him. He understood more than I realized. The next week was a whirlwind. I spent hours unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, setting up Tyler's room so that it felt like home rather than a temporary refuge. I even splurged on a few new items: a second-hand desk for him, a soft rug for the living room, a few potted plants to brighten the space. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't the house we'd lost. But it was ours, and it was mine, and that mattered more than anything. Meanwhile, news of Vincent's unraveling spread quietly through the social circles we shared. Lorraine's phone calls increased, but they were met with polite deflections. "Cassandra is busy settling into her new home," Tyler said firmly when she tried to reach him. "Mom's doing fine." I stayed out of social media entirely, letting Vincent's posts, his desperate attempts to project confidence, be the only public record. His Instagram still featured curated images of him and Brittany, the yacht photos, the dinners, the designer suits. But anyone paying attention would notice the cracks. No new property acquisitions, no company growth announcements, vendors quietly filing suits, car leases nearing default. The facade was collapsing faster than he could maintain it. I focused on myself and Tyler. The first thing I did was enroll in an interior design course at the local community college. It was a dream I had shelved for 15 years, and now I had the space, time, and freedom to pursue it. I spent afternoons sketching, experimenting with colors, learning the principles of design I had only observed from a distance, while decorating model homes for Vincent's company. Each lesson, each project, was a small act of reclamation, a way to rebuild not just our home, but my sense of self. Tyler, ever the observant one, would peek over my shoulder as I worked. "Mom, that color would make the living room look bigger," he'd say, "and I think you should move the couch closer to the window." I smiled, letting him participate. He had been through so much, watched the betrayal, and yet he was resilient. He was learning what I had known for years. Patience, observation, and careful action mattered more than immediate gratification. Vincent tried. He called Lorraine, begging her to intervene, trying to find a way to pressure me into helping him salvage what remained of his finances. He reached out to Diane too, but she had gone silent, realizing that loyalty without principle was worthless. His panic calls became frequent. I never answered. Let him realize that the world didn't revolve around him anymore. One morning, about 2 weeks after the mediation, I received a letter in the mail. It was from one of Vincent's creditors, a large bank. They were seeking immediate repayment of a defaulted loan attached to the business. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. This was the result of choices he had made. He had signed willingly. He had assumed full responsibility. The law, as cold as it could be, had ensured fairness in the strictest sense. I sat down at the small kitchen table, reading the letter with Tyler beside me. "Looks like the Empire's finally catching up with him," I said. Tyler nodded, quiet but with a sense of satisfaction. He was watching the lesson unfold in real time. It was a strange sensation, freedom and justice intertwined. I could see the patterns of control Vincent had always exercised. The manipulation, the dismissal of my intelligence, the silencing of my voice. And now, all of that control had backfired spectacularly. I hadn't needed revenge. I had needed patience, planning, and a deep understanding of the system. The system had done the work for me. Tyler eventually started helping me with small projects in the apartment, painting a wall, assembling a shelf, placing furniture just so. Each act was a reminder that the life we were building was our own. I didn't need to reclaim a house or a company that had never truly been mine. I needed to reclaim autonomy, stability, and the ability to look my son in the eye and know he was safe, secure, and proud of me. 3 months after the final hearing, Vincent attempted to contact me again. This time it was a letter, carefully worded, apologetic, full of self-justification. I read it once, then set it aside. He was facing bankruptcy, vendors calling lawsuits, business assets liquidating, and yet he wanted my time, my understanding, perhaps even my sympathy. I had none to give. Tyler, curious, peered over my shoulder. "Mom, are you ever going to talk to him again?" I shook my head. "No, Tyler, he made his choices. He got exactly what he asked for." And now we move forward. Life settled into a rhythm. The small apartment became home. I painted walls, hung photos, arranged furniture. Tyler thrived, school and friends filling his world. I thrived, learning new skills, taking on my first small clients as an interior designer, rediscovering a sense of independence and competence I hadn't felt in years. Every once in a while, I would catch a news story or a social media post about Vincent. Bankruptcy filings, press releases about the business shutting down, desperate attempts to salvage credibility. Each time, a small, private smile would tug at my lips. Not cruelty, justice. Not gloating, balance restored. 15 years of giving, enduring, sacrificing, and being underestimated had culminated in a moment of perfect equilibrium. And Tyler watched it all. He understood in his own quiet way that the world was fairer when you protected yourself, when you prepared for the worst, when you never underestimated your own worth. He would carry those lessons forward. I sometimes thought of Diane, wondering if she had finally realized that loyalty without integrity was worthless. I never reached out. Some bridges, I had learned, weren't meant to be repaired. Some friendships weren't worth salvaging. Lorraine, too, faded into the background, realizing that her influence over me was gone. She had underestimated the patience, intelligence, and foresight of a woman she had long considered weak. The apartment smelled faintly of paint, of cleaning products, of home. Tyler's laughter echoed through the rooms as he moved his toys around. I sipped my coffee, thinking about the binders, the careful documentation, the 3 years of quiet observation. All of it had led here. All of it had protected my son, reclaimed my independence, and ensured that Vincent Mercer faced the consequences of his own choices. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, utterly free. Cassandra Hale, 35 years old, single mother and emerging interior designer, had won not with anger or rash action, but with strategy, patience, and an unwavering sense of justice. The world had underestimated her for too long. That mistake would never be made again. I looked around my apartment, the sage green walls catching the afternoon light. It was small, it was simple, it was mine, and that was enough. The first morning of spring arrived quietly, sunlight spilling through the blinds and casting stripes of gold across the sage green walls. I stood in the kitchen of our apartment, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the faint scent of potted plants. And for the first time in years, I felt no tension knotting my shoulders. The chaos of the last 15 years, the betrayal, the court battles, the meticulous planning, all of it felt distant now, like a storm I had weathered and survived. Tyler appeared in the doorway, wearing one of his oversized hoodies, hair messy from sleep, eyes bright and curious. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, kiddo," I replied, smiling. I poured him a cup of cocoa while I sipped my black coffee. The morning was quiet but purposeful. Routine was grounding, a reminder that our life wasn't defined by Vincent's mistakes or the years we had endured, but by the choices we made every single day. Tyler sat at the table, sneakers tapping on the floor. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, already knowing he had been pondering the aftermath of our divorce. "Do you ever regret waiting 3 years?" His voice was hesitant, careful. "I mean, you could have done something sooner." I thought about it. 3 years of silence, patience, observation, and documentation had been excruciating. There were nights I stayed awake, staring at spreadsheets, ledgers, and accounts, tracing every transaction Vincent had tried to hide, every lie he had spun. But I shook my head. "No, Tyler. Every single day I waited, I was protecting you and our future, and besides, it taught me a lesson I'll never forget." He tilted his head. "What lesson?" "Patience isn't about waiting," I said softly. "It's about using the time you have wisely, planning, learning, and protecting what matters most. Rushing never gives you the whole picture. And knowing your worth, never forgetting it, makes all the difference." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. I was amazed by how perceptive he had always been. Even at 13, he had understood the subtle dynamics of people, the hidden motivations, the truths that others overlooked. He had watched Vincent, Diane, Lorraine, and even me, and quietly learned. I had my own lessons to internalize, too. 3 months had passed since the hearing, and I had spent them rebuilding. My first interior design project was complete. A small, cozy apartment for a woman named Sandra, who had just left a 28-year marriage. Seeing the tears in her eyes when she stepped into her newly painted kitchen, sage green, of course, reminded me why I had held onto my dreams for so long. One room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID, my accountant. "Cassandra," he said, voice cautious, "I know you're busy, but you'll want to hear this. Vincent's business, it's collapsing faster than anyone anticipated. Lines of credit frozen, vendors filing suits left and right, creditors calling about balloon payments on the cars, he's scrambling. There's talk of bankruptcy filings in the next week." I set down my coffee, a small smile tugging at my lips, not out of malice, but of quiet satisfaction. 15 years of being underestimated had culminated in this. Vincent had wanted everything. He had assumed all the assets, all the debts, all the responsibility, without fully understanding a single detail. And now, the consequence was fully his. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "Please keep me updated." Tyler, listening over my shoulder, let out a low whistle. "Wow, so he's finally paying for all of it?" I nodded. "Exactly, he made his choices. He signed the documents. Now he lives with them." For the first time, the weight of the past 15 years felt lighter. Vincent's arrogance, his manipulation, his pretense of control, it all disintegrated, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his own actions. Brittany had long since disappeared from our lives, likely realizing that a life built on illusion wasn't sustainable. Diane had stopped calling, her loyalty exposed as shallow and self-serving. Lorraine tried to intervene through Tyler, but he had shut that down with the same quiet authority he had shown since the hearing. Life, at last, belonged to me. The next weeks were a careful balance of rebuilding and exploring new opportunities. I threw myself into interior design, taking small projects, experimenting with color palettes, and learning the business side of freelance work. I wanted my work to matter, not just aesthetically, but emotionally. The sage green kitchen I painted for Sandra became a symbol of new beginnings, a metaphor I shared with every client. A fresh canvas, a fresh start, a reclaiming of self. Tyler flourished alongside me. School was no longer overshadowed by tension at home. Friends visited, homework was done at the kitchen table, and laughter returned. One evening, he came to me holding a small plant he had bought with his allowance. "Mom, for the living room," he said, eyes bright. "Thought it'd make it feel happier." I hugged him, truly hugged him, feeling the weight of every fear, every sleepless night, every humiliation dissipate. "Thank you, Tyler. It does make it feel happier." That night, after Tyler went to bed, I sat at my small kitchen table with a notebook. I was sketching ideas for a new project, letting my imagination run wild for the first time in years. My thoughts drifted to Vincent. I didn't hate him, not truly. He had made his choices. He had faced the natural consequences. And in a strange way, he had taught me patience, resourcefulness, and the value of planning for the long game. The truth was, I had been free long before the hearing. I had been free the moment I decided to protect myself and Tyler, to keep our finances secure, to document every detail, and to wait for the right moment. The courtroom, the judge, the documents, they had only formalized what was already a fact. Vincent's empire, his control, and his illusion of power were gone. Weeks later, the first real client of my own business called. I met her in her empty apartment, just walls and floors, no furniture, no warmth. She was nervous, unsure where to start. I listened, asking questions, taking notes, offering suggestions. Slowly, we transformed the space. Colors, lighting, furniture placement, all designed not just for aesthetics but for comfort, for a life she wanted to lead. When she stepped back and looked at the finished rooms, tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I feel like I can breathe again." I smiled, feeling a swell of pride. This wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. This was about creating beauty, stability, and joy. This was about reclaiming my own life and helping others do the same. And then came the day Vincent appeared at my doorstep. I wasn't surprised. News travels fast, and bankruptcy filings, failed deals, and collapsing credit are hard to ignore. I opened the door to find a man who looked older, tired, defeated. His suit was wrinkled, watch gone, hair unkempt. The arrogance and confidence that had defined him for so long had evaporated. "Cassandra," he began, voice low, tentative. I didn't know. I didn't realize I made mistakes. Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, studying him. The man who had demanded everything, who had underestimated me for 15 years, was now reduced to a version of himself he had never seen. He had nowhere to hide, no allies, no illusions of control. "You asked for everything except Tyler," I said calmly. "You got exactly what you asked for." He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Tyler's room, to the small apartment that bore no resemblance to the mansion we had once lived in. I need help." I messed up." I shook my head gently. "You have to live with your choices, Vincent. That's part of being a grown man, part of being responsible. I'm not here to fix your mistakes. I'm here to live my life and make sure Tyler's life is safe and happy. That's all." He looked at me, searching for a crack, a hint of the woman who had loved him for so long. He didn't find one. "Can't we start over, work together?" I smiled faintly. "No, Vincent, this isn't about starting over. This is about moving forward." "Alone?" He nodded slowly, defeated, and for the first time I felt no anger toward him, only pity. He had been given the chance to do right by us, and he had chosen otherwise. Now he had to live with it. When he left, Tyler peeked out of his room. "Mom," he looked smaller than I've ever seen him. "Yes," I said, "smaller because he built his life on sand. But we were building ours on rock." That evening, I sat in my small living room, surrounded by the life we were reclaiming. The sage-green walls caught the sunset, casting a warm, golden glow. Tyler was curled up on the couch with a book. I sipped my coffee, feeling the quiet, steady satisfaction of a life rebuilt from patience, wisdom, and unwavering focus. Cassandra Hale, 35, single mother, interior designer, and survivor of manipulation and betrayal, had finally reclaimed her life. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And that was more than enough. I glanced at the photo of my grandmother on the shelf, the old recipe box beside it, and whispered, "You were right, Grandma. Always keep your own money, always know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small." The apartment was quiet, simple, small, but entirely ours. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly, completely free. The past was behind me. The future was ours to build. One room, one color, one day at a time. And this time, I was in control.